You've been posting comments asking about which lenses you should get for the Nikon D3400.
Let me show you what I've got. I asked Nikon to send over a camera, this is the D5500, and a selection of lenses.
I don't usually review lenses, and this is really more of an overview. You'll find excellent lens reviews at DxOMark, DP Review, The Wirecutter, Tony Northrup, and others. I don't really have the setup to test lens quality in detail, but let me show you how and why they're different.
Lenses, although they have fewer buttons, dials, and features, are just as important as the camera in a photography system. They deliver the light to the sensor. So let's talk about the features and the numbers to improve our understanding. I'm not going to tell you which is the best lens. I'm going to give you the information you need to make an informed decision for you, your photos, and your creativity to select the best lens for you.
Nikon makes two kinds of lenses, DX and FX. The DX lenses are designed for cameras with what Nikon calls DX sensors. The rest of us call them APS-C or crop sensors. The FX lenses are designed for the full-frame FX cameras.
4 are DX lenses, well suited for the D3400 and D5500 and other DX cameras. But Nikon saves their best lenses and their most expensive lenses for full-frame FX cameras. The 5th lens is an FX lens.
A 35mm FX lens turns into a 50mm lens on a DX camera. That's what the crop refers to. And the FX to DX crop is 1.5. So a 70-300 FX lens turns into a 105-450 lens on a DX camera, more or less.
An FX sensor is larger than a DX sensor. A 35mm FX lens creates an image large enough for an FX sensor. A 35mm DX lens only creates an image large enough for a DX sensor. On an FX sensor, the smaller imaging area of the DX lens creates a vignette around the image. This image simulates that. FX cameras know when a DX lens is used and automatically crop to take an image the size of the DX sensor, so you get the smaller field of view that a 50mm FX lens would provide, the same image you'd get on a DX sensor. So a 35mm DX lens is only capable of producing a 50mm image regardless of the sensor size. If it was my company, I'd call a 35mm DX lens a 50mm lens. And because we're using a DX camera, for every focal length from here on, multiply by 1.5. There's a lot we can tell about these lenses even before we put them on the camera. This small, light, tiny lens is the kit lens, 18 to 55 millimeters. That means it can zoom from a 27mm field of view to an 82mm field of view. It's under 200 grams, so paired with the D5500, under 700 grams. Great traveler with one annoying feature: in the fully closed position, it must first be unlocked. Like most lenses, it has two rings, one to set the zoom, the other to set the focus distance. The filter diameter, the circumference of the lens from the front, is 52 millimeters. And you can tell a lot about a lens from the weight and filter diameter. Bigger and heavier is better. You can tell a lot from the price too. But hold on, before we slam this as a cheap kit lens, these are pictures I took with this lens. I'm pretty sure the majority of viewers and photographers, particularly those who are price sensitive, would be pleased. The detail and the contrast, two elements where the lens matters, are very good. Better than a phone, better than a point and shoot. Not that under the right circumstances they can't take great photos too. There's one switch on the lens to select auto or manual focus, and a second one to select VR, Nikon's optical stabilization. This enables you to use slightly slower shutter speeds and still get a clear image. Here's the step up, the 16 to 80 millimeter. 16 is a little wider, 80 zooms a little further. It's bigger in every dimension, and at 480 grams, over twice as heavy. The filter diameter is 72 millimeters. There's a little window to see the focus distance, and it immediately makes the D5500 look like a better camera. The focus window provides two benefits. It shows you the distance and makes the lens more predictable. It's easy to rotate the focus ring a certain distance and know that it will achieve a certain focus. Very useful for video. The 16-80 has a focus switch, a VR switch, and a second switch to select the VR mode. Nikon recommends active if you are moving, like shooting from a car. Here's a selection of pictures taken with the 16-80, and I'll bet that at first glance they look about the same. So what's the difference? Let me show you. Same focal length, aperture, and ISO. Pretty similar until we take a closer look. The 18-55 looks okay until you zoom to full size, then the 16-80 is clearly sharper. So the larger your print, the more you'll want the better lens. Let's turn on the camera and switch to live view to give you an interactive look at how they work. First, the range at the zoomed out or wide end 16 and 18 millimeters are fairly close. Zoomed in, 55 millimeters is clearly less than 80 millimeters, but it's not that big a difference. Before we go on, and just to enable me to show you, I'm switching to A, or aperture priority mode, for a minute, and although the D5500 has auto ISO, I'm turning it off and setting the ISO manually for demonstration purposes. So there's a number I overlooked: the lens's opening or aperture. Aperture is expressed as f-stops, and with apologies, smaller f-stops are larger apertures, and larger apertures are open wider, letting in more light. Across the bottom of the screen are the three exposure settings: the shutter speed, 1/60, the aperture, f3.5, and the ISO, 100. The lens controls only the aperture. On the kit, the widest aperture is f3.5 to f5.6. It's stated as two numbers because the aperture ramps, which means that as you zoom in, it closes. So when wide, you may be able to shoot with a shutter speed of 1/60th, which is usually sufficient for static objects, and an ISO of 100, which isn't very noisy. Zoom in, and the shutter speed resets to 1/8, risking blur, or increase the ISO to 800, adding noise. The 16-80 is also a ramped aperture lens, f2.8 to f4, which changes the shutter speed from 1/125 to 1/15th, and only requires an ISO of 400 for 1/60th. That's better. Better lenses have smaller f numbers, but the best lenses don't ramp at all. There's also an anomaly with the kit lens and some other Nikon lenses. In live view, in manual mode, the kit lens aperture can't be changed. The 16-80, however, can be changed in live view. With a smaller f number, the larger aperture lets in more light, and a lens with a larger aperture is often called a fast lens. The same scene with the same light can be taken at a higher shutter speed, important for your daughter's basketball games, or a lower ISO for a nicer image.
Now, I'm saying this and showing you as if you would be shooting in A or aperture priority mode, but the lesson is, even if you're shooting in P or auto mode and the camera's doing this work for you, it is making those compromises on your behalf. And you can be okay with that, but be aware of the impact your lens has on those settings. So if your subject is blurred, the shutter speed is too slow. If your image is noisy, the ISO is too high. And a lens with a larger aperture, which is a smaller f-stop number, will be less likely to take blurred and noisy images.
One more thing, focus. I'm setting the focus switch to M for manual and turning the lens all the way to the left. That's the Nikon standard for close focus. Use the plus key for a magnified view. The kit lens can focus objects as close as 28 centimeters. With some lenses, that distance changes as you zoom, not the kit lens. The 16-80 can focus as close as 35 centimeters, and even though it zooms further, the kit lens takes a tighter close-up. Both of these lenses are standard walk-around general-purpose zoom lenses. These lenses will cover the large variety of things you'll want to photograph: food, people, buildings, whatever subject attracts your fancy. What they won't do is get very close to distant objects like birds or wildlife, or get wide enough to take shots inside large buildings like churches or tight spaces like rooms. Let's go wide first. The 10 to 24 f3.5 to f4.5 wide angle. I told you I like heavy, this is 460 grams, and large. This has a 77 centimeter filter diameter, although the actual glass area is 4 centimeters across compared to 5 on the 16 to 80. Its closest focus distance is 24 centimeters. There's a window to see the focus distance. There's a focus switch. No stabilization. Although I accept there's some distortion, wide-angle lenses are my favorite. You can stand on the sidewalk or at the foot of the bed and still get the shot. The other end is the 70 to 300 telephoto lens. It ramps from f4.5 to 6.3, is light for its size at a mere 415 grams, and has a 58 millimeter filter diameter. Closest focus distance is 1.1 meters, but that distance increases as you zoom in. There's no distance scale, no focus or stabilization switch. And if you're watching closely, you notice that the other lenses were AFS, and this is AFP. And P refers to the focus motor, silent or pulse. The pulse motor is newer and faster, but not compatible with some older Nikon bodies. With P lenses, the switches aren't needed, as the camera's firmware can switch the settings. And while this is clearly a budget lens, it is the gateway lens to photos of wildlife and sports action.
All of these lenses have a range of focal lengths. They're all zoom lenses. And this is a prime lens. Its only focal length is 50 millimeters.
Focus window, focus switch, no stabilization. 58 millimeter filter diameter, it weighs 185 grams. The closest focus distance is 45 centimeters. But this lens's real attraction is a wide open aperture. That makes it possible to create soft, blurred backgrounds to really make your subject stand out. Although the standard portrait lens is 85 millimeters, this is close enough to create very pleasing portraits. And even if it is bargain priced, its quality is relatively high. It's simpler to make a high-quality prime as it requires less glass and fewer moving parts. Let's take a minute to look at the background blur, often called bokeh, the Japanese word for blur, but it's really taken to mean the quality of the blur. For all of these images, I've zoomed in all the way and opened the iris fully. The pen is at the lens's closest distance, the tulips about a meter behind. These images also indicate how different the same composition appears to different lenses and at different focal lengths. And now that we have the whole range, let's compare. 10 millimeters on the 10 to 24, 80 on the 16 to 80, 135 on the 70 to 30, then 200 and 300 on the 70 to 30.
One lens type not in this selection is a macro lens, used for getting close-ups of small objects. I use one for the close-up and detail of these lenses.
While many lenses are designed for a specific purpose, all lenses are really general purpose and can be used for nearly any shot, and don't overlook the effects that can be achieved by using a lens against its design purpose, like using a wide angle for portraits. Not flattering, but interesting. Only some of these lenses include hoods, which in addition to making a lens look cool, they block errant light rays from hitting the lens at odd angles and reducing contrast, kind of like this.
Let's talk about video for a moment, for as suitable as these lenses are for stills, they are lacking a few features that are desirable for video.
For video, you'd like to be able to zoom without losing focus, and the zoom should start and turn smoothly. For video, you'd like to have a very clear and direct relationship between the focus ring and the distance to the subject. That means markings and a defined travel, a beginning and an end. The lens window helps, and those lenses typically do hit a soft end point. But with these lenses, if you want a rack focus, best to use the touchscreen. Once you've selected the focal length, or range that you want, the decision comes back to quality. With Nikon, as with most brands, you get what you pay for. And if you have the money and can discern the differences, you may consider all of these lenses inferior.
With lenses, as with many things, once you've achieved good enough, the small improvements can be costly compared to the benefit. The price may double for a minor increase in quality. And only you know what's good enough for you and your images. I hope this helps. Thanks for watching. If you have questions or comments, use the field below. I do read and reply to all relevant and civil comments.